Section 9, Chapter 7, Part 1 of the Life and Adventures of Kit Carson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Phil Schempf. The Life and Adventures of Kit Carson by DeWitt C. Peters. Section 9, Chapter 7, Part 1. Kit Carson is employed as a hunter to Bent's Fort. His career for 8 years. Messrs. Bent and St. Vrain. The commencement of his acquaintance with John C. Fremont on a steamboat. Is employed as a guide by the great explorer. The journey. Arrival at Fort Laramie. Indian difficulties. The business of the expedition completed. Return to Fort Laramie. Kit Carson goes to Taos and is married. He is employed as a hunter to a train of wagons bound for the States. Meeting with Captain Cook and 4 companies of U.S. Dragoons on Walnut Creek. Mexicans in trouble. Kit Carson carries a letter for them to Santa Fe. Indians on the route. His safe arrival. A Mijos advance guard massacred by the Texians. The one survivor. The retreat. Kit Carson returns to Bent's Fort. His adventures with the Utahs and a narrow escape from death. The Texians disarmed. The express ride performed. It has already appeared that Kit Carson was now at Bent's Fort. Also, that his occupation as a trapper of beaver had become unprofitable. His services were, however, immediately put into requisition by Messrs. Bent and St. Vrain, the proprietors of what was called Bent's Fort, which was a trading post kept by those gentlemen. The position which he accepted was that of hunter to the fort. This office he filled from that time with the most undeviating fidelity and promptitude for 8 consecutive years. During all of this long period, not a single word of disagreement passed between him and his employers, which fact shows better than mere words that his duty was faithfully and satisfactorily performed. It is but seldom that such a fact can be stated of any employee, no matter what the service. Here, however, was an example in which the nature of the employment would of itself, at times, present cause for discord, such as scarcity of game, bad luck, and men hungry in the consequence. But Kit Carson was too skillful in his profession to allow such reasons to mar his fortunes. With the effort, the game always was at hand, for it was not his custom to return from his hunts empty-handed. Of course, Kit Carson's duties were to supply the traders and their men with all the animal food they wanted, an easy task when game was plenty, but it would often happen that the bands of Indians, which were always loitering about the trading post, would precede him in the chase, thereby rendering his labors oftentimes very difficult. From sunrise to sunset, and not unfrequently during the night, he wandered over the prairies and mountains within his range in search of food for the maintenance sometimes of 40 men who composed the garrison of the fort, and who were dependent on the skill of their hunter. But rarely did he fail them. He knew for hundreds of miles about him the most eligible places to seek for game. During the 8 years referred to, thousands of buffalo, elk, antelope, and deer fell at the crack of Kit Carson's rifle. Each day so added to his reputation that it is not to be wondered at, considering the practice of his previous life, that he became unrivaled as a hunter. His name spread rapidly over the western continent until, with the rifle, he was acknowledged monarch of the prairies. The wild Indians, accustomed to measure a man's greatness by the deeds which he is capable of performing with powder and lead, were completely carried away in their admiration of the man. Among the Arapahoes, Cheyennes, Kiowas, and Comanches, Kit Carson was always an honored guest, whenever he chose to visit their lodges, and many a night, while seated at their watch fires, he has narrated to them the exciting scenes of the day's adventures, to which they have listened with eager attention and unrestrained delight. When arrayed in his rough hunting costume, and mounted upon his favorite charger Apache, a splendid animal, Kit Carson was a picture to behold. The buffalo were his favorite game, and well were they worthy of such a noble adversary. In the eyes of a sportsman, the buffalo is a glorious prey. To hunt them is oftentimes attended with great danger, and while thus engaged many a skillful man has yielded up his life for his temerity. The American bison or buffalo seems to demand at our hands a short episode from the narrative of Kit Carson's life. This animal has several traits of character peculiarly his own. If alarmed, he starts off almost instantly and always runs against the wind, his sense of smell appearing to be better than his eyesight. What is a most remarkable fact, a herd of buffalo when grazing always post and maintain a line of sentinels to warn the main body of the approach of danger. When a strange object comes within sight or smelling distance, these sentinels immediately give the alarm by tossing up their heads and tails and bellowing furiously. The whole herd instantly heed the warning and soon are in motion. Buffalo run with forelegs stiff, which fact, together with their ugly-looking humps and lowness of their heads, gives a rocking swing to their gait. If a herd, when in full motion, have to cross a road on which wagons are traveling, they change their course but little, and it sometimes happens that large bands will pass within a stone's throw of a caravan. At night they are quite systematic in forming their camps. In the center are placed the cows and calves, while, to guard against wolves, large numbers of which always follow them, they station on their outposts the old bulls. The age to which a buffalo may attain is not known, but it is certain that they are generally long-lived when not prematurely cut off. When their powers of life begin to fade, they fall an easy prey to the small carnivorous animals of the plains. The attempt has been made to domesticate and render them useful for agricultural purposes. Hitherto, such efforts have invariably failed. When restrained of their freedom, they are reduced to mere objects of curiosity. In hunting the buffalo, the most important matter for the attention of the hunter is to provide himself with a suitable horse. The best that can be selected is a trained Mexican or Indian pony. Their familiarity with the game and the prairies, over which the hunter must ride at full speed, renders these horses quite safe. On the other hand, a green horse is sure to be terribly frightened when called upon to face these ugly-looking animals, and the rider will find he has his hands full to manage him without thinking of his game. One great danger to be apprehended is the being led into a prairie dog town. Here a horse needs experience to carry his rider through with safety. Upon reaching the herd, the hunter dashes in at the cows, which are easily recognized by the fineness of their robes and their smaller forms. The white man hunter, of all weapons, prefers a revolver, but the red man uses the lance and bow and arrows, which he handles with remarkable dexterity. The place of election to make the deadly wound is just behind the foreshoulder, where the long, shaggy mane of the hump is intersected by the short hair of the body. The death wound being given, the blood gushes out in torrents, and the victim, after a few bounds, falls on her knees with her head bunting into the ground. If by chance a vital organ is not reached, the pain of the wound makes the stricken animal desperately courageous. She turns upon her pursuer with terrible earnestness, ready to destroy him. It is now that the horse is to be depended upon. If well trained, he will instantly wheel and place himself and rider out of harm's way. But woe to both horse and hunter if this is not done. The lives of both are in imminent danger. In case the buffalo is killed, the hunter rides up, dismounts, and makes his lariat fast to the horns of his game. He next proceeds to cut up the meat and prepare it for his pack animals, which he should have near by. By their aid he easily carries it into camp. It would doubtless afford many a page of exciting interest could we carry the reader through all the varied scenes of the chase, in which Kit Carson has been the principal actor. To transmit to our narrative a choice fight with a fierce old grizzly bear, or perchance a fine old buffalo bull turning on his destroyer with savage ferocity, or a wounded panther with its inevitable accompaniment in the shape of a hand-to-hand encounter for dear life, each of such could not fail in giving interest to the general reader. We are forced, against our own conviction of duty we owe the public as Kit Carson's chosen biographer, to pass by all such acts of his personal daring and triumph, because of his own unwillingness to relate them for publication. Notwithstanding our urgent requests, backed up by the advice and interference of friends, Kit Carson is inflexibly opposed to relating such acts of himself. He is even more willing to speak of his failures, though such are few, rather than his victories in the chase. While the description of these adventures could not fail to furnish useful and interesting data, most unfortunately, Kit Carson considers that they are uninteresting minutiae which have pertained to the everyday business of his life, and no persuasion can induce him to enter upon their relation. Not so when he is entertaining some of the brave chiefs of the Indian nations, whose friendship he has won by his brave deeds. If they are his guests, or he himself theirs, then their delight to hear kindles a pride in his breast to relate. He knows that he will not by them be called a boaster. Before quitting the mountains, Kit Carson married an Indian girl to whom he was most devotedly attached. By this wife he had one child, a daughter. Soon after the birth of this child his wife died. His daughter he watched over with the greatest solicitude. When she reached a suitable age, he sent her to St. Louis for the purpose of giving her the advantages of a liberal education. Indeed, most of Kit Carson's hard earnings, gained while he was a hunter on the Arkansas, were devoted to the advancement of his child. On arriving at maturity, she married, and with her husband settled in California. The libertine custom of indulging in a plurality of wives, as adopted by many of the mountaineers, never received the sanction, in thought, word, or action, of Kit Carson. His moral character may well be held up as an example to men whose pretensions to virtuous life are greater. Although he was continually surrounded by licentiousness, he proved true to her who had first gained his affections. For this honoring of virtue, he is indebted in a measure to the present sway which he holds over the Western Indian races. While their chiefs are seldom men of virtuous act or intent, they are high in their appreciation of, and just in their rewards to those whose lives are patterns of honor and chastity. The Indian woman, concerning whom no truthful tale of dereliction can be told, when she arrives at the requisite age, is invested with great power in her tribe. One of the ancient customs, well authenticated, was to honor the virtuous women of their tribe with sacred titles, investing them, in their blind belief, with the power to call down the favor in behalf of the people of their Manitou, or Great Spirit. But every woman who aspired to this honor was required upon a certain day of the year to run the gauntlet of braves. This was sometimes a terrible scene. All the warriors of the tribe, arrayed in their finest war costume, and armed at every point with lance, bow and arrows, knife, tomahawk, etc., were drawn up under the command of the principal chief in a single line. At the head of this line was placed a kind of chaplet or crown, the possession of which by any woman was supposed to confer the power of necromancy or magic, rendering her able to heal diseases and to foretell events. The line having been formed, all of the young maidens of the tribe were drawn up in a body at the further extremity, and any of them who aspired to the possession of the chaplet was at liberty, having first uncovered her back and breast as far as her waist, to march before the line of warriors within 10 paces of their front, and if she lived to reach it, take possession of the crown. On the other hand, it was the duty of any warrior who knew aught by word or deed against the virtue of the advancing maiden, to kill her upon the spot. If one arrow was shot at her, the whole band instantly poured a flight of arrows into her bare and defenseless bosom until life was extinct. Again, it was the belief of the untutored savage that whatever warrior failed to make this knowledge apparent, if he possessed any, by sending his arrow at the aspirant, would always be an object of revenge by the Great Spirit, both here and hereafter, and that he would always live in the hereafter in sight of the happy hunting grounds, but never be allowed to enter them. This latter belief made it a rare thing for young girls to brave the attempt, but sometimes the candidates were numerous, and the horrible butchery of the young girls which took place formed a terrible expose of their lewdness. To kill an innocent girl was equally a matter which would be forever avenged by the Great Spirit. The warm friendship which sprang up between Kit Carson and the proprietors of Bent's Fort, under whom he held his situation as hunter, is a sufficient index of the gentlemanly conduct and amiability of heart evinced towards him on their part. The names of Bent and St. Vrain were known and respected far and near in the mountains, for in generosity, hospitality, and native worth they were men of perfect model. Mr. Bent was appointed by the proper authority the first civil governor of New Mexico. after that large and valuable country was ceded to and came under the jurisdiction of the United States government. He held this distinguished position, however, only a short time, for in the year 1847 he was most foully and treacherously murdered by the Pueblo Indians and Mexicans. A revolution had broken out among this turbulent people, and, in his endeavors to stem it, Governor Bent was frustrated. At last, being driven to his own house, he barricaded the doors and windows. The rascally rioters, after a severe contest, succeeded in breaking open his doors, and, having gained access to their victim, murdered him in cold blood in the midst of his family. The only crime imputed by the mob against this benevolent and just man was that he was an American. His untimely death, which was mourned by all the Americans who knew him, cast a settled gloom over the community in which he resided. The Mexicans were afterwards very penitent for the share they took in the committal of this black crime. Although several of the guilty party are still living, they have left the country, for the mountaineers have not forgotten the friend whom they esteemed and respected, and will avenge his death if ever the opportunity offers. Ceran St. Vrain, the surviving partner of this celebrated trading firm, was equally noted. Upon declaration of war between the United States and Mexico, St. Vrain took an active part on the side of his country, and, from his extensive knowledge of the Mexican character, was able to render important services. At the close of the war, he became extensively engaged in mercantile pursuits within the new territory, and by his untiring industry amassed a large fortune. He was the first man who discovered and recognized the superior skill of Kit Carson as a hunter, and for his subsequent success in life Kit Carson is much indebted to him. St. Vrain is one of the oldest mountaineers now living, and as such he is currently viewed by his old and new associates in the light of a father. As the reader can now easily compute, 16 years have elapsed since Kit Carson commenced his exploits in the Rocky Mountains. During this long period, as frequently as once every year, he had sat down to a meal consisting of bread, vegetables, meat, coffee, tea, and sugar. While dining thus sumptuously, he considered himself as greatly favored with luxuries of the rarest grade. Few men can say with Kit Carson, "During 16 years my rifle furnished nearly every particle of food upon which I lived." Fewer can say with equal truth that, for many consecutive years, I never slept under the roof of a house or gazed upon the face of a white woman. It was after such an experience as we have endeavored to paint by the simple tale of his life thus far, that Kit Carson longed once more to look upon and mingle with civilized people. For some time before he determined to visit the United States, this desire had taken possession of his mind, and had been growing stronger. The traders of the fort were accustomed yearly to send into the States a train of wagons for the purpose of transporting their goods. The opportunity, therefore, presented for Kit Carson to gratify his wish. In the spring of 1842, one of these caravans started with which Kit Carson traveled as supernumerary. When it arrived within the boundary lines of the State of Missouri, he parted from his compagnons de voyage and went in quest of his relatives and friends, whom now he had not seen for over 16 years. The scenes of his boyhood days he found to be magically changed. New faces met him on all sides. The old log cabin where his father and mother had resided was deserted, and its dilapidated walls were crumbling with decay. The once happy inmates were scattered over the face of the earth, while many of their voices were hushed in death. Kit Carson felt himself a stranger in a strange land. The strong man wept. His soul could not brook either the change or the ways of the people. While he failed not to receive kindness and hospitality, to which his name alone was sufficient passport among the noble-hearted Missourians, nevertheless he had fully allayed his curiosity, and, as soon as possible, bid adieu to these unpleasant recollections. He bent his steps towards St. Louis. In this city he remained 10 days, and, as it was the first time since he had reached manhood that he had viewed a town of any magnitude, he was greatly interested. But 10 days of sight-seeing wearied him. He resolved to return to his mountain home, where he could breathe the pure air of heaven, and where manners and customs conformed to his wild life, and were more congenial to his tastes. He engaged passage upon the first steamboat which was bound up the Missouri River. We cannot resist the impulse which here struggles for utterance. Look upon that little steamboat as it ascends the mighty Missouri, bearing in its bosom the man who was destined to point out the hidden paths of the mighty West, to mount and record the height of the loftiest peak of the American monster mountain chain, to unfold the riches of the interior of a great and glorious empire to its possessors, and finally to conquer with his good sword, preparing the way for its annexation to his country, the richest soil and fairest land on earth, thus adding one more glorious star to the original 13 of 1776, a star, too, of the very first magnitude, whose refulgent brightness shines clear, sparkling and pure for the true sacred writ and American liberty. On the deck of that little steamboat, the two men, one the master mind, the giant intellect, the man of research and scholastic strength, the scientific engineer, the other than whom his superior as American mountaineer was not living, stood uninterested spectators of each other, and each unconscious why they had been permitted to enter the same cabin. The Christian student of American history cannot pass by this simple circumstance without seeing Heaven's wisdom in such a coincidence, namely Kit Carson, for the first time in 16 years bending his steps to his boyhood home, just as his 16 years of mountaineering skill and experience were required by the one master workman of American engineering about to enter upon the exploration of inland North America. Kit Carson wandered over the boat, studying its mechanism, admiring the machinery which, so like a thing of life, subserved the interests of human life, watched with quiet reserve the faces and general appearance of his fellow passengers, occasionally modestly addressing an acquaintance for some present were known to him, and finally singled out from among the strangers a man on whose face he thought he discovered the marks of true courage, manhood, and nobility of character. The impression which Kit Carson had thus received was nothing fleeting. The eagle eye, the forehead, the form, the movements, the general features, the smile, the quiet dignity of the man, each and all of these attributes of his manhood had been carefully noted by the wary and hardy mountaineer, and had not failed to awaken in his breast a feeling of admiration and respect. While on this boat, Kit Carson learned the fact that the man whom he had thus studied was Lieutenant John C. Fremont of the U.S. Corps of Topographical Engineers, also that Lieutenant Fremont had been earnestly seeking Captain Drips, an experienced mountaineer, but that he had been disappointed in finding him. Upon learning this, Kit Carson fell into a deep reverie which lasted some little time, when, having brought it to a conclusion, he approached Lieutenant Fremont, and modestly introducing himself, said, "Sir, I have been some time in the mountains, and think I can guide you to any point there you wish to reach." Lieutenant Fremont's answer indicated his satisfaction in making the acquaintance which Kit Carson had offered him, and that he would make inquiries concerning his capabilities of performing the duty for which he offered himself. End of Section 9, Chapter 7, Part 1.